And then, what age were you when you went back and did the...
16.
16, and that's when you were with the political theater.
And that's when I joined the political theater.
Okay, how did you get into that?
I was in Catholic school, and I began to question the teachings, basically. So we had we had a class called Religion, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. It was a catechism. And I started writing essays that questioned the teachings of the church, particularly its position on abortion and rape and all that stuff. And I got in trouble in school. It's a little bit like Spring Awakening. That manifesto was what I was considered the black sheep of the class. Because of that, I wasn't rowdy or anything, but I was fomenting dissent. I don't think I succeeded very much. But so, because I got in trouble, I started seeking like-minded people outside of school. And I hooked up with a group, sort of a political group, that was also doing theater. I was still in high school. And this time, I got hooked. And I was my first group. Well, I took a workshop with them, and it was Boal. The Boal technique. So we were creating our own work and taking them to communities, and then. It had these open-ended questions where they would interject and we would determine the end together. And after that, I stage managed for them. But after high school, I went to the university as an economics major and never took a class in economics because I spent it all with the theater department.
In Manila.
In Manila.
And just give me an example of the plays that you were in with the political group. You formed them out of. Did you start with headlines from the newspaper?
We did start with headlines from the newspaper, but also we did political plays. We did Brecht, Computation Chalk Circle, Fritz Benevitz, for example, had come to the Philippines. He's with the Berliner Ensemble and had directed Macbeth and totally did something that I had never seen before. And what else did we do? A lot of Brecht. We did Bourgeois, stuff like that. So it wasn't just device theater. We also did a lot of the classics, but really foregrounded the political stuff in it. And it had to, so we chose classics that would comment on what was happening.
And you played some of these at rallies.
We played some of them at rallies, or we played them in basketball courts at poor communities. We devised a beauty contest play where all of our costumes were hidden under our clothes, and then that year the Miss International pageant was being held in the Philippines, and Imelda had built a brand new edifice just to house that pageant at the cost of millions, where people were starving. So what we did was, just before the pageant started, we took out all our costumes, and one was Miss U.S. imperialism, one was Miss Japanese imperialism, Miss feudalism. We staged a little protest play in front of the pageant and had all the press that was covering the pageant come out and cover us. The bad thing is that there was also several battalions of military people that then surrounded us. So the international press stayed with us until we walked out of the complex and into a shopping center where we were then able to run.
From the military.
From the military. I was a freshman then.
Wow.
Yeah. There was by then, I think that what's the key thing here is that I got to connect this idea of theater as a social instrument of engaging people in conversation and sort of getting them to mobilize, getting them to act. So it was never enough. We were out to shatter this audience-spectator relationship. It was never a passive thing. So when we went to a community, we followed that up with organizing. Like, how do you do this? What are the issues facing the community? Water, women's health. Mostly it's poverty. What do you do with that? And that really, and we also did it with no money, zero. Our costumes sometimes were like newspaper. And that's the basis for my understanding for theater, which is so completely different from how it functions, here. But I don't know, it's sort of become the fallback for me, because I know that if you take everything away, all the funding away and all these things away, I can still make theater some way that would sort of satisfy that thing in me. But that's what I learned there, that the power of theater and the artists and creating stuff and mobilizing and organizing people, that's really, and you saw the effects of that on people.
And how many years was that period of your life?
7.
7 years.
So I started my sophomore in high school,
Yeah.
and then I did 4 years of college.
And you were with this group for that whole...
No, my high school college group was another sort of political group that was organizing. When I entered college, we created that group at the college.
I see.
With the theater department.
And so were you there when he was deposed?
No, he was deposed in 86. I left for the United States in 84. Because in 84, I was called to the military headquarters. My uncle was head of the military intelligence unit. So he called me to his office and said, well, what do you know? He dropped the folder in front of me, and it had my dossier, all the stuff that I'd been doing, all the rallies that I'd been attending. And he said, what's up with that? You could get in trouble. So he said, we'll do something. Why don't we do this? He said, I'll give you all the money you need to run for student council. We'll support you. And all I want you to do is throw parties and take pictures of everyone at the party. This is my uncle. So that evening, first I told all my friends that they were trying to do this. And that evening I called my father, who was in LA, and told him what his brother had done. And 1 week later he sent me a plane ticket to leave, to get out of there, because he couldn't, he was, I guess, trying to avoid confronting his own brother. But it was getting crazy. And
that's when you left the Philippines?
I left the Philippines.
Yeah.
I just left because it had gotten bad. And then 86 Marcus was deposed, but 2 of my friends were killed, theater people, in 1985.
And they were killed in?
We don't know, but they showed up dead in the river.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, it had gotten... Well, it's a sort of a dictatorship, like lashing out just before it goes.
Right.
And they had begun. First, they went after the politicians and the political, but they had started targeting artists because they knew that it was an effective organizing tool. It was a very effective organizing tool. In fact, that's a lot of the grassroots movements against Marcos was led by artists because you could get into a community and engage people in with art and start getting them to think, as opposed to going in there and sort of spouting ideologies. Theater was a much more effective tool.
Which doesn't, I guess, emotionally engage them, but
Emotionally engage.
The theater does.
But the theater does.
Theater does.
Yeah.
And what was the rally for $1 million that you?
Was the announcement of Cory Aquino that she was going to run for president. Her husband had just been assassinated. In fact, I was at the house, her house, when his corpse was brought in. And his mother had refused to wash away the blood, or he was shown that way. But at a rally in 1984, after his death, Cory was then considering running for president, and there was 1 million people who protested and supported that rally. Before this, you were not allowed to even assemble. It was against the law. There was an anti-sedition law that Marcos passed. Public assembly was not allowed. We were under martial law. So this was the first time people actually felt like, okay, it's time to stand up after 20 years of this stuff.
And do you remember what the more specifically the content of that particular show was? That particular piece of theater? Yeah,
we wrote it. We portrayed Marcos as a vampire, and so we had a coffin, we had masks, we had bats, we had monsters. We were doing that, and it was an allegory using the Dracula story to show how Marcos is basically sucking the blood of the country and all of his minions. But what was good about that, it was a very simple device. The audience provided the sound effects. When we held up a sign that said howl, they all went, oh! Now imagine, 500,000 people doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or bark. So it was a very simple thing like that, but it allowed people to express that frustration and engage, and in a fun way, That's how it was done. It's a very simple thing, but we got them to do it. Mm-hmm. I don't know how.
And then what was after the show, what was your organizing to get addresses to? I mean, that's not going to help so much.
No. This was a very national event to which we were invited. This is a bigger audience than we've ever done. What the result of that is that leaders from different communities began taking workshops with our group to learn how to replicate that model within their communities. Mm-hmm. That's the organizing that we did. We possibly can't organize the entire country, but a training program was devised on theater formation and community organizing. The whole trajectory, and it was documented in a book that was then disseminated around the country, and it's a model book how to do this, step by step, and was in fact borrowed by South Korean student organizations to organize their protest rally several years later. Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh. And this was all obviously because I'm curious to
distilling it down to the point that it can travel easily
Mm-hmm.
and simply, and people can connect with it. But it's distilling the idea that you can get from here to democracy.
Yeah.
It's not that.
We also ended up putting up plays up on top of a truck that traveled from the northern Philippines all the way to the south for one island over 15 days.
Uh-huh.
It was called the People's Caravan. And plays were just done. The truck would stop, we would do the play, it's a different town, and move on. And some people from that town would join the caravan.
Hmm.
It's just a really effective tool. It's not sophisticated theater at all. We had no lights or sound. You had to know how to use your voice.
Yeah.
Really know how to use your voice
Yeah.
and your body,
Mm-hmm.
because there was nothing else. If we had a boat, we built it out of our bodies. So little stuff like that. It's sort of really basic, almost theater games technique. Viola Spolin, that
Mhm.
book. It was that.
Paul Sill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very simple stuff,
Yeah.
but effective because the content was there. So yes, it was always content over form. We're trying to convince the rest of America that they need to program Asian American plays. Seattle, for example, hardly does that. And it's one of the largest concentrations of Asian Americans in the country. Same thing in San Francisco. ACT will sometimes program, or they did Orphan of Jiao last year, I think. But they don't do it enough. And it's always the same argument where the Asian community doesn't go to the theater, or very difficult to pull them into the theater.
But do they go to the theater?
They do if you engage them. So it can't be a one-off. You can't do M. Butterfly and then not do anything again. It's got to be consistent. You've got to.
It's a slow growth.
It's slow growth, and you have to be with the community. You have to actually engage, because you got to get their trust first.